So I guess we're getting ready to get started here. I'm just up here to, before we get started, just to acknowledge this whole MASTERcrit scheme, which Jasmine proposed, and Hilary and Michael were very grateful you participated in for the inaugural event. Would not have been possible without the Uihlein family's generous funding by establishing the Fitzhugh Scott Chair in Design Excellence at SARUP. For those of you who don't know, this is in honor of one of Wisconsin's great architects. And so you guys are participating in a long line of Fitzhugh Scott chairs, including Steve Daines, Neil Frankel, and Will Bruder. So thank you very much for coming. But I think Jasmine is now, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine to kind of tell us what's going on and to do the rest of the introductions. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Just a few words. Hey, welcome guys to the inaugural MASTERcrit. Before I begin, I wanted to thank some people at the school who really helped make this possible. Associate Dean Steve Height, Julie Redville from Computing, who's somewhere around here in Treffitt, Dean Nordgren from the business office, Chandra Nataj from the dean's office, the woodshop manager William, who's also the all-around man about town, I would say, yeah. And the chair, of course, Carl Wallach, and finally Dean Bob Greenstreet, who can't be here right now. Hopefully you'll see the work tonight when he gets back. But the premise of MASTERcrit was pretty simple. What happens if we adapt the model of a master class in the context of an architecture school? What could we generate? So if we conceive of a week-long exercise, which would showcase the talents of the best students in the school as nominated by the faculty, and engaged in a project brief proposed by an expert in the discipline. So it's a sort of version of a master class within the context of an architecture school. This year, 12 graduating seniors and master students were nominated. Really? I'm okay. Am I not okay? I'm okay. Yeah, I'm good. I speak loud. Participated in the Charrette over spring break. And the task that was assigned to them by our MASTERcritics was to propose new models for housing, specifically the garage apartment type housing. And the inspiration, the neighborhood of the Manil neighborhood in Houston was also proposed as a kind of site. But the projects weren't really necessarily meant to be cited, but more inspired by the site. So I just want to quickly name these guys. Andrew Cesars. Yes, hi. I'm going to wave. No. Jared Meredith. Hello. Hugh. So, Jerry Wittoon, am I saying it? Yeah, good. Sarah Traver. Nick Zakauskas. Ephraim Kana. Ephraim, yeah. Kelly Yuen. Anna Doran. Tessa Begay. Anthony Meyer. Last but not least, Justin Sager. Okay. So just a few words about our MASTERcritics. I'm going to give a bigger, fuller introduction tomorrow at their lecture. But Michael Meredith and Hilary Sample are principals of MASTERcritics, a firm that's internationally renowned and based in New York City. Michael is currently assistant professor of architecture at Princeton University, and Hilary is associate professor of architecture at Columbia University. Their work and writing has appeared in, I'm just going to brag a little, is that? Yeah. Many, should I speed it up? Many publications, including Artforum, Blog, Perspective, Praxis, Domus, and the Harvard Design Magazine, among others, and exhibited at many venues, including the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, the New York Urban League, and the Van Allen Institute. So without further ado, I present to you MASTERcrit. Who's presenting first? Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so this project kind of kicked off with a intense two-day research on garage apartment type as kind of an inheritance from a long-standing American tradition of both westward expansion as well as economic development. And we also looked at a comprehensive site research of the Mill District of Houston. Looked at tectonic strategies as well as the human proportions of relationship to domesticity in the home. My part of the research, and as well as Anna's, we focused on the prefab kind of as this more of a global umbrella for both the garage apartment and the bungalow type. Kind of what to situate it within a historic context first and foremost. And I chose this picture by Francis Flora von Palmer. It's called "The Cross-Continent Westward, where the Course of the Empire takes its way." And I think it's a very poignant painting because it establishes a lot of themes of our project immediately. In the foreground, there is already kind of a development of the American home across the distant prairies.
Can I stop you for a second? You need the mic. The mic is required. Says the chair. Oh,
It's really loud. Okay. So, yeah, the foreground there establishes
Just speak louder. Okay, I'll speak louder. So, kind of the foreground kind of foreshadowed the Western development of our country, and in the background was this almost an infinite landscape where the train kind of already projects this pioneering individualism towards an almost distant, unknown future. It begins to establish the idea of a capital commodity as well as a democratic datum from which our country is developing. And then some other research kind of tying back to the initial beginnings of this country, of the idea of a village. And this is pre-westward expansion. And I wanted to really touch upon the idea of the super family. And I think this kind of goes back to the global collective that you guys were hinting at, the Mill district. And this is, I think the democracy of it really did not exist yet at this point, but it was about a benevolent power handing distributing land, but everyone fit with, everyone had a profession that fit within the context of that town. They kind of made this entire system function. And later on, I think self-reliance became a really important point when we started moving out west and we didn't have as much established infrastructure. And but at the same time, it really liberated us from the village, because in the distant prairies, we began to actually chart off land. And kind of really thinking about the farm plot in relationship to the farmstead, how at this point we were able to actually, as kind of certain freedom, establishing the structure anywhere on the farm, and by choosing the center of the farm as the best, most ideal spot that gave you the most, I guess, the most fresh air, is that a term? Freshest of air, and as well at the same time you're getting broad views, so you're getting it's creature comforts as well as views. At the same time, this was kind of parallel the development of a new construction type, and the construction type was balloon framing, and it kind of liberated us from the use of mortar by using materials almost pre-calculated, but maybe not. But it's size lumber and nails, so it kind of followed the tradition of rapid development. Quickly put up a home. And near the turn of the century, this one, the idea of a pre-made home really surfaced as a type. Sears magazine was one of the first, I guess, companies to really market the home as a commodity. This is when, I'll touch on it a little later in the post-war era, when the home really became, really lost the symbol of, the American family, but became a commodity. Actually, yeah, I'm ready in the post-war era. So, yeah, the post-war era is when the prefab really came into, it's really hit its peak because of a lot of the technologies we learned from the war through shipbuilding processes. So the home itself was a commodity, but also every part of it also became a commodity. So as the home ages, it could be replaced. And I guess to kind of sum it up, the house type nowadays no longer really represented the family as an institution, but it was really outwardly focused on the community as what is our biographical story of each individual family and how it's supposed to aggregate within this global context of the village. So yeah, that's it.
All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the garage apartment as a building type. Brief history, especially in the Houston area. Garage apartments are kind of part of the overall genre of auxiliary dwelling units. So traditionally placed on a plot of land that already had an existing housing structure. In Houston, they are kind of, they have a pretty long history due to kind of the lack of building codes. And so in the Great Depression, we kind of saw a surge of these auxiliary dwelling units due to families moving in together because of either lack of money or a way to generate another income from renting out these auxiliary units. And then in the 50s, the post-war kind of housing boom again saw another influx of kind of this housing type being placed across the landscape. And so there's definitely a history in Houston of this housing type, which was good to find out, you know. And then kind of traditionally today, we're also seeing kind of this new spike in the construction of these housing units. People are moving back into the city. It's a great way to create density in a city that is very horizontal, like Houston. And so a lot of new homes, especially in kind of older neighborhoods, closer to the center of Houston, the developers are building these garage apartments at the same time as they're building the house, leaving it up to the buyer what to do with it, whether they want to rent it out or create a studio space or whatever, but they're kind of becoming part of this, or becoming integrated more into the kind of housing typology in the area. And then again with kind of the tiny house movement now these days too, so people are wanting to live in small spaces, kind of it's a lifestyle choice, and so I think that lends itself also very well to this kind of housing typology. Again, Houston without the kind of traditional building codes is a much greater place for these things to happen. So there's no real restriction on their construction other than the fact that they need to have access points via a driveway, which usually runs alongside the existing house. But other than that, there's no kind of restrictions on renting or other things that would traditionally be apparent in cities. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Housing type.
Test-and-added research on the bungalow type, which the bungalow originated in the province of Bengali in Bangladesh, and gets its namesake from that place of origin. And it's a low-rise building with a front porch, and the porch is meant to provide shade in hot climates. That's preferable. And the origination was in the 17th century approximately, and the British were occupying, and they had their soldiers kind of adopt and adapt that housing type, and then they exported it from Bangladesh to Britain, and then they kind of spread it across the globe, and that's how it ended up in America. And from there, in different states, you'll find different adaptations of the bungalow. So some have basements, some have half-sunken basements, some are 2 levels. The gable will differentiate, but in general, they have a similar kit of parts, which is the front porch and the gable. And at our site in Houston, they have quite a few of these. That's basically it.
All right, so Justin and I looked at human scale. The reason that we looked at that as a research topic is because typically the garage apartment doesn't allow for the large square footage. And given that in school we don't really explore that many residential projects, we wanted to see where we could really take minimizing space and how a person could really act within these limitations. So we first looked at the actual average dimensions of the human body, male and female, and how low could your ceiling actually go and you would be able to live in that kind of space. And we compared that to the building code in Houston. We looked at that in different countries, and we found that it's pretty universal as far as the widths of hallways and doorways and the heights of stairs. And once we found what we were really allotted to work with, we tried to look into what strategies one could do architecturally that would make a small space feel larger. And a lot of the things had to do with having light interact with the small space in a variety of ways. You don't just want to flood the area with light, you want to have a sort of nuanced lighting scheme that makes the space feel like it's more than one. You would like to use bright reflective finishes, nothing dark that just sucks all the light out of the room. You want to have circulation that's unobstructed so you don't feel like your existence is working around your furniture. And just applying that, using that as inspiration for developing these new typologies. In conjunction with that, we also looked at different precedents like the Schroeder house, where you have this floor plan that's open, but movable partition walls that can divide the space at the user's will. And different examples where there's a strong connectivity to the outdoors. So yeah, we just wanted to push our limitations when it came to human scale and see how that could really influence our iterations.
So now Hugh and I decided that it was time to zoom into the Manil neighborhood itself and to look at some of the larger scale patterns of the neighborhood. So we started by generating this figured ground map of the area to get a sense of this relative scale of buildings that we find there. And then we noticed, looking at satellite imagery back to 1937, that the way that the neighborhood developed in response to the large institutional buildings, so the Renzo Piano's Mill Gallery, the Rothko Chapel, the large Richmond apartments, and the Cy Twombly Gallery, they basically would just clear out entire blocks of houses. So we actually created these diagrams of the specific locations where these institutions were built, so you get a sense of how many houses were actually traded out. And I mean, we thought this had an interesting resonance with the Generic City article, and how really the response to need and want kind of lowers the value of what it means to keep houses and to remove them. And so the major areas, like I said before, are where the Rothko Chapel took place, so it's an entire block. The Richmond Apartments, which was originally appeared to be this large estate, big piece of land where they built this huge apartment complex. Now, just recently, they tore down the northern part of the apartment building. The Manil Drawing Institute is a new project that's going to be completed there. And then the Renzo Piano building itself, which is another whole block of houses that was removed. And then we kind of wandered around the neighborhood in Google Street View, because we didn't have the time to actually go to Houston, and picked out a series of images that zoom in to the kind of mundane, but nonetheless, I guess, somewhat interesting aspects of the neighborhood. And you find that it's not really the architecture that you pay attention to anymore, but it's actually things like dappled light created by the canopies of trees in the neighborhood, accessorized sidewalks where people put different types of planting to mark that edge of the pavement, people who are proud of their golf carts and display them on their lawn. And so it's just a kind of sense that you can get of the whole neighborhood by kind of wandering through these images here.
So finally, Jared and I, we zoomed in even further and researched the institutions of the Manil. So we looked at just a few of the main buildings on the campus, the Rothko Chapel, the side Twombly Gallery, the Manil, the Byzantine Chapel, which I'll give you some history on that because I found it the most interesting. It was actually, the architect was Dominique de Manil's son, and until 2012 it held 2 frescoes which the Manil's family paid to refurbish, and in 2012 those frescoes were actually returned to Cyprus, so they're no longer of the Manil Foundation. And then finally the Drawing Institute, which will be finished in 2016 is the proposed date. So.
Is that everyone done with the research? Okay, so go ahead, Jerry, and start. So Jerry, now the students will do 5 minutes each.
Okay.
Hilary, Michael. First group of 6.
All set? Yeah. Okay, so again, my name is...
Learning the rules of the game.
Learning the rules. So we're each presenting and then comments after the first 6. Okay. So when we were originally doing the research of the neighborhood, we were doing that in conjunction with looking into some architectural theory. One article that stood out to me most was the Rem Koolhaus's Generic City. He talks about how identity can be something that is limiting. Paris can only get more Parisian, and the generic, the commonalities that are shared amongst different cities can essentially be a little bit liberating. So that was set a really good precedent for this whole project in general. We're looking at a really banal, generic housing typology and seeing where we can explore with that. So when it came to the garage apartment at its most reductive, it was interesting to me how it's essentially this very segmented dwelling that's stacked on top of each other. You have the garage, the apartment, and a staircase left on the side to connect the 2 of them. And it would seem that if you're taking your apartment and putting it on top of your garage, it's to maximize your, or limit your square footage and take advantage of the lot. And as we heard that the conception of this typology was originally done in order for people during the Great Depression to make money off of their attics above their garage. So there was this affiliation between the house and the auxiliary dwelling. And so when it came time for me to look at a contemporary artist, I was really drawn to Iago Portal. He's a Spanish artist, he works in Berlin, and his technique is very simple. He works with bright 80s day-glow color palette acrylics, and he puts them on the canvas, and very dynamically he spreads them across the composition. He works on multiple paintings at one time, so you can imagine it's a very active process. And so when thinking about, what can I draw from this technique and apply it to the garage apartment, I really liked this idea of blending and smudging everything into one space. What was once segmented can all become one. And I decided to do that using the stair as the vehicle. So what if the stair was intact on? It's essentially everything becomes the stair and it blends together. And this allowed me to extend the floor plates to create different spaces within this very simplistic form. The other thing it allowed me to do was to take the whole building and spread it across the lot. So proportionally, it made a lot more sense for it to sit on a 50 by 130 foot space. In my process, I looked at a lot of different ways this blending could occur, different orientations, but I decided to go with one dynamic access where the car can actually descend into the ground. We talked about using this hydraulic system to bring it up into the space, and then the occupant goes along this very linear staircase. Another aspect of my artist that I wanted to draw from was this idea of the gradient, the blending, and that manifested itself in terms of the columns getting more dense and getting more spread out, the program being more public, the garage, the kitchen area, the living room area, and the bedroom, public to private. And the other aspect of that is this blending and connection between all the programs. No matter where you are in this apartment, you have a sight line to your vehicle. So there's not that strong distinction anymore, which is really important to me. The other aspect in terms of drawing from the artist and bringing that into the details was looking at the technique and seeing how the brush strokes leave this trace. So I wanted to use the CLT floor plates, which could be prefabricated into essentially any shape, and have that be a reference back to that brush stroke, that sinuous form that's drawn in there. And also in terms of my detail, I mean, one thing that we wanted to remain true is there's some reflection back to the original typology. You'll see a lot of us have maintained this gabled roof and mutated the form that the gable sits on, which I think is a pretty strong visual connection to it. But I think in my project it might have been worth exploring maybe other renditions of how this roof could go, how it could blend one way or another. But I wanted to maintain that for this version, as well as having my cladding be this just tongue-and-groove siding that you see on so many suburban homes, and kind of just stretch that across the entire exterior of the form.
Thank you, Jared. Jared? Shuffle on down.
I'm Jared. After doing the initial research, there are a couple things that I became interested in the site. One of them was the bungalow type. And, you know, it's commonly a single family home. And it was interesting to me on our site because of the fact that it's kind of lost its identity. The Manil collection bought several bungalow homes, painted them all gray. They converted one into a store, and they also constructed one brand new and turned it into a restaurant. Along with that, I was also interested in the fact that it's kind of an odd neighborhood because it is trying to be public and open to the public, but the bungalow type is kind of more about privacy with its low-rise pitch and windows, or usually there's large plantings near the windows which kind of make it more private. So when looking for inspiration on how to start this design process, I found this artist based in Berlin named Benyamin. And what he does is he steals advertisements from places like bus stops and along buildings, and he'll take them back to his studio, and he'll put solvents on them and start to transform them into something else. This image is actually a little nicer. A lot of the images are very creepy and have black eyes, and it's kind of a way of, he's taking this thing that's been gone through so many renditions and it's been perfected, kind of the model in the advertisement, that it's become generic and banal, and we pass by it without paying attention to it, and then he transforms it and puts it back up, and immediately it's drawing attention and causing you to stop and look at it. So I was thinking our site, the banal type is the bungalow. The apartment garage overall is very generic, but there's only 2 of them present on our site, or in the Manila neighborhood. So I decided to kind of take the bungalow and do this transformation into the garage apartment, but at the same time transform it from something banal into something a little more spectacular. So at first I wanted to kind of keep some of the aspects of the bungalow that are important. The gable roof, the front porch idea, the generic window openings, the low-rise structure, and also the kind of traditional construction, the framing system. So through the transformation of bringing it from a single family home down to more of a single person, it became pinched and also stretched a little to cover more of the site. All the program that was enclosed was pushed up to the second level, and that kind of goes back to allowing the first floor to be more of a semi-public space, which speaks to Chipperfield's site plan, which calls for more connections throughout the site, and also how many of the institutions, the Dan Flavin exhibition is the least visited because there's not really a connection from that to the rest of the site. So I kept the traditional framing and decided to kind of separate a cladding system on this exoskeleton, which is the bungalow type, and kind of create transparency throughout. And then the apartment in this space becomes more of an object, which you can see through the system. And as far as program, it's really simple. The living spaces are near the rear of the building, which is actually the most public space with the most openings, and the private bedroom, bathroom are more towards the front, which is private. And I guess it's kind of interesting because it transformed from the bungalow into the apartment garage, but at the same time, it transformed from something banal into something more sculptural, more of an art piece. And even though it maintains the form that's kind of generic throughout the site, it still fits within the context, because even though it's a little more spectacular, because there's work by Heiser and Flavin present on the site that's visible, that it sort of becomes an art piece that fits within the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anthony, and with this project, I approached it with the idea of 3 primary parts to it. There's the generic exterior, there's the kind of mysterious interior, and then the hidden poche space. So of those 3 parts, I began with the exterior and analyzing the community, the Manila community, and the garage apartment type. And these diagrams here show kind of the transformation of that generic exterior volume from more of just a shelter necessary concept to a gabled shedding on precipitation, so the necessity, and then the garage apartment type itself as a place for the vehicle to live, and then the apartment to sit on top, and then that necessitates the stair. And then on site, previously mentioned, there's 2 garage apartment types, and one of them has this kind of cantilevering canopy that creates an open air carport in front. And because of Houston's amiable climate, you have the ability to leave your car outside quite often, which opens up the garage, and you can repurpose that space. And from there, I extruded the back out so that you could put all the necessary programmatic pieces on the one level to increase accessibility with the community. And then I covered that canopy space in the end to create the lofted sleeping area that is reached by the stair. So that's how I interpreted the exterior, and that's how I came to this volumetric space. And then after that, the second part is the kind of exciting interior. And my artist was a local flamenco guitarist by the name of Evan Christian, and he plays at the Jazz Estate down on, probably gonna get this wrong, but I think it's Farwell, every Wednesday night, and it's really awesome. And I actually have some, he's got a couple songs on YouTube. He's not very popular, so he's only got so many songs. but he beatboxes and plays the guitar and sings soulful reggae music. So it's like this diverse set of skills and music. And this is the lyrics to the song that you're hearing right now over pictures of him at the jazz estate and playing his guitar. And I think he's an incredible artist. And the Manila community is kind of this fostering of artists and their work. And I wanted this building's exterior to capture some of that acoustic quality and kind of create maybe a mouthpiece would be a word, but it kind of sends the sound out to the street. And you could open up these garage doors to the front and the back, and then these windows as well, so then the sound starts to resonate at the street and on the sidewalk, and it kind of brings you in and fosters that Manila community. And then the third piece is the hidden crochet space. So this model represents kind of the tectonics and what would be the structure. And similar to Jerry's, you have the CLTs. And that creates this hidden crochet space, and then in plan it kind of undulates and it creates these crochet spaces that you can carve out of and create these really special places where you can kind of find, and that completes the third part of the project. Yeah.
So while doing research on the Manila neighborhood, two things stood out to me. This first thing was the character of the neighborhood, which a lot of people have mentioned is this sort of genericism that happens with these housing technologies, the bungalows and the garage apartments. And then in terms of the Manila institutions, they paint the facades this consistent gray color. There's this overall banal effect.
You speak up now.
Yeah. Oh my God, it hurt.
You can start dancing.
So, and the second idea is this idea of connection. There's this sort of permeability to the site and a strong influence on connecting the public to the art and to one another. And the third thing is light. There's an abundance of these live oak trees that creates this very beautiful effect on the site, the sidewalks and grass. And continuing with that idea of light, I studied and researched this artist who's based in California, Christopher Racer. And he works with light effects through installation and photography. And he takes these once like familiar surroundings and turns them into these very fantastical poignant spaces. And I really wanted to capture the ethos of this work and also the mechanics behind it. So he starts out with these blank white walls with roofs typically, and manipulates the light apertures, typically with glass slits, and the surfaces and the spaces and outside spaces to create these very sublime environments. So looking at the garage apartment, I wanted to kind of stick with this very prototypical program and proportions of the spaces. There's the three main elements, which is the garage, the staircase, and the living space. And so I wanted to articulate each space and create this sort of experiential experience through this very small building. So you begin in the dark garage, and then you enter through this semi-lit staircase with these penetrating beams. And And then looking further into that space, the living area, and going back to that idea of the mechanics, I wanted to form the space up there with these faceted ceiling, drop ceiling, and create this idea of refraction and penetrate through these slits in the wall. And then looking closer to my detail, I use typical wood stud construction that is usually used in these garage apartments with aluminum siding. And I wanted to show the cut through these very angular framed windows, as well as the connection from the roof to this dropped faceted ceiling down to the second floor door joists.
So through the research that we did, the one thing that kind of stood out to me was the fact that the garage apartment is really just this modest apartment, and the fact that it's just very, very modest in its form, its program, and its efficiency, really. And so I kind of wanted to explore each of the programs individually, with one being the garage, the stairs, and the apartment as well. So the artist that I was influenced by was he's actually a filmmaker, which is a little different. He actually kind of exploded through YouTube, and essentially through his videos, he kind of takes you through his journey and his experience. And so, yeah, each video that he does, he's kind of in all of his videos. And so he takes you through this journey, and he always challenged the idea of filtration, the fact that through regular films, there's a filter between the art form and then his audience, for example. So I kind of wanted to introduce that into the garage apartment. And the first thing that I looked at was actually the garage, where I actually decided to kind of adapt it, just like he actually had to adapt because of YouTube itself, his filming. And so I looked at the garage and actually made a void where the carport would be, so it's open, and then introduced this volume, which it's pretty much a studio, and it can be used for anything art. In this instance, he's a filmmaker, so a film studio. And it has this opening where it brings in the idea of art and kind of reintroducing it into the home. So in this case, the garage apartment kind of adapts to a kind of work unit, or a live work unit. So that's kind of what I did, and I wanted the studio itself to kind of read very different than the apartment on top. So I wanted to read like it's its own volume, and it was independent in its own. And so moving on to the apartment, I kind of stuck with that generic form. And it really, from the exterior, it reads like a regular garage apartment with the gable roof. But then once you go inside, you realize that the interior walls are actually rotated. And that's kind of made me reintroduce my artist, or the artist that I was influenced by, where through his films he kind of does whatever he wants. And so he kind of takes you through his journey, and so the idea of the interior walls being rotated is something that you just wouldn't expect, kind of like his videos. And it takes you through a short journey through his apartment.
What does it do? Is it he skateboards in airplanes?
He does a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah.
Really, really weird guy, very self-centered guy.
Yeah, but it's okay. So
Yeah,
the specifics of just the thing that you're drawn to are just like almost this unexpectedness of it. Like you would just do this kind of Dada experiment, you just sort of all of a sudden decide to whatever.
Travel the world, yeah.
I'm only
do
looking
that,
at that one photo, but like, yeah.
So yeah,
Do it.
that's kind of
Yeah.
what my way of bringing it to the art summit. And so the idea journey, I kind of made a very modest design where each program, each room is kind of divided by the window, which is actually shown by through the detail. Kind of gives you a change of scenery, the light break coming in, and kind of makes a divide between the different programs of the apartment. And then just to add on to the fact that the volume on the bottom, just to articulate and show you how I wanted it to read like a separate volume. Okay.
So with my project in the house prototype, I was really interested, or what I got out of most of my research of the bungalow was just different characteristics of the bungalow, and that it's very horizontal compared to what we were designing for a new form of the garage apartment, which is very horizontal. But then from that, reading from Chipperfield's master plan of the whole site for Manil, what really stood out to me was the idea of having connectivity and green space. So with that, I took the basic idea of the bungalow house, raising it up on columns, and then so that it creates this green space. And in early designs, I have this just basically a diagram of like how I thought of my house, and that it's kind of a floating piece on top of this green space. And then more within the house, I thought about what my artist does, and her name's Peter Summers, and she does beadwork, and it's in a traditional form, but she has a spin-off in like a modern way of doing it. So from there, what I took was just basically her dense work and how intricate it was, and then taking that and applying it to the facade of the bungalow apartment type house. So from there, I based off her work as mainly a module. So with that, I have the house into two different parts. One is within the car, so that the car would go into the house underneath, and then the other is just makes basically for what a human would need for a space. And then from there, I broke it into 4 different parts. And then also in creating a different hierarchy within the house, I raised the living area, so in that it creates this main promenade that runs through. But then I was also interested in how I could play with privacy and public. So with that, I did more research into the Manil site, and I took just basically the fabric of the site, and I analyzed the houses, and I thought that this particular block within the site was really interesting, and within that, I went through the houses and I looked at how high they were, the roof, what the roof lines were, and also the material, which helped me decide what the facade of my house would be. And so basically, within the house, I have these vertical, like wooden panels that are smaller and more intricate, and that it reflects my artist's work. But then also creating little moments of like creating more privacy within this front area of the house, and that you wouldn't really be able to see it. Another aspect that I took from the bungalow house was this overhang, creating that traditional veranda that goes over the house and creating that space of like that protects the person from weather, rain. And then also just the angle of the house is 3 to 12, which is a typical bungalow slope for the roof. And then from that, within my model, I did the corner showing this module I based my house off of, and the more intricate, small spaces within that are created to create permanent. Okay, so this is my time.
I wrote some notes, and almost every student so far has said banal, that the housing type is banal, and I was curious about that, how that kind of came about. Is this through the reading from Generic City, if you know, is housing just considered a kind of banal type? And then there was also a slight difference in that where it was about banal came about through the effect of the color, because in the neighborhood Manil painted, the foundation is painted as houses that they own this kind of gray color, which actually that color in itself, what I learned when I was there is not, they're not sure even what color it is. And so they've been going through a process of a kind of preservation and trying to uncover it. And so also because of its process of being painted since whatever, it's been the 80s or 70s, that it's oxidized, so they're having a hard time really deciphering exactly what the color is. They know though that some of the houses were painted white, in fact, before, which is really much more of a kind of traditional bungalow color, and I understand that even in Milwaukee, the traditional bungalow is painted white at a certain height or down, so I thought that was a kind of interesting sort of connection between. But this question of banal, and then I think here, I didn't touch your name, but
Ephraim.
Ephraim. So you were saying, you know, I heard you say that the garage apartment is a modest type, and so I thought that was interesting to say a kind of distinction between, you know, banal versus modest, right? And I'm just curious if maybe we could start there, because certainly I don't think I've seen anything today so far that's banal. You know, how does that, is that something we need to talk about in relation to this idea that of generic? Because to me, the neighborhood is not necessarily a generic, and of course, since you guys haven't had the privilege to be there yet or visit, there could be that reading. So these were just some general observations I had. If you leave a problem.
I also think at the scale, I think we should just get rid of it.
Everybody mentions it.
Yeah, I think also it's interesting is just in terms of representation of everything.
Like the piece.
Yeah, just in terms of the representation. I mean, we can get skateboard's maybe a generic representational problem, but like everyone has presented. I think in a way it's a pretty small project. We presented kind of different sort of different types of performance, let's say. So like it's actually amazing to see. In some cases, I really prefer your framing models over your actual renderings, I think, wishing they were real. And you can see the detailing, and then the rendering, and then the kind of diagrammatic drawings, and then this kind of strange aesthetic, or whatever it is, inspirational, conceptual kind of art practice. Which I think is interesting. And all the parts don't really necessarily jive together yet, but I think they kind of produce a kind of interesting kind of place where we can talk about. So that's a kind of beginning comment. And then and we can go specifically through everything here, but I think in terms of the now generic, we're going to to everybody discuss. I do think that at some level they're all, everyone has accepted a kind of idea of type, which maybe gets turned into generic quickly, and then everyone is trying to work around it. But in most cases, people were okay with just taking on the exterior as a problem. Like the exterior, little tweaks. But for the most part, it's like, it may be a condition, kind of condition we're in or something, but like the outside you sort of give over, it's institutionalized, it's the manila, it's whatever, it's many things probably, and you're like, okay, but the inside is where we can get crazy, or whatever those guys, who can skateboard.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I think that there's a kind of reaction to sort of setting up this comment of banal and that produces a series of houses that are completely not banal in any way. And I think that there is in some of the projects, I think there's a hybridization, right? Like I would say this one, the orange.
No, it's Jared.
Jared, sorry. I'm texting Jared. So, talking about this one. This project.
Yeah.
Talking about bringing the two types together, right, to produce something new. And in that way, I think that's kind of where I would say that for me, the first project is about, it's interesting, it recalls, in the way you sort of describe your project, it's more about kind of telescoping, right? The kind of housing we know through, just going back to the introduction and the painting about moving westward and thinking about expansion of housing for families, right? I thought that was very poignant what you described and sort of set up as a kind of extension of the problem. And to think through that in this new type for a city, that there's this kind of traditional telescoping house, right? You can see them on farms, right? Where families would literally add on and build through the kind of process of telescoping. You do that, you kind of internalize them. Right? So that even though you describe your project more as a sort of sweeping volume. And so I thought that was interesting, that if there would be a way to, how could you push that further? To sort of continue to develop your house, and that you use it through the CLTs and through the brush stroke as a kind of middle step. But the space itself, it seems as though there could be another way to think about that as more fluid versus the kind of telescope. So I'm curious about that as a formal study. And then the outside, it's very different though, I think, in a way. I feel like in each of the houses, I would say, I don't know that I agree that they sort of just accepted the type and then the exploration is only on the inside. I think in fact there's a kind of play between that, and particularly in proportion, or in the case of the projects that actually start to double or get wider, because the garage apartment is really such a narrow type. So that's interesting to me too, like how you actually double that, and if the garage apartment is all about a kind of economics, to be so minimal, so tightly organized, because it's all about having a kind of income, right? So you rent out that space pops. So that's interesting.
How did you guys find your artists, by the way? I'm really curious about just this kind of process.
I left it up to them.
Like, I mean, because I'm trying to imagine, are you just surfing the internet, like, or you were out one night and the guy was playing guitar and it really moved you? I mean, I think it's all fine. I'm just curious. You know, like, because that in some ways is the kind of biggest leap. I would say actually in every case, the kind of role of the kind of whatever the aesthetic pop or artist or client, whatever it is, the excuse to try to engage this other thing feels like the most distant to some degree. But maybe I'm wrong. And I'm happy to just to figure out like where did you find your.
Well, it's interesting. You know, you originally talked about these contemporary artists in the world of art today as being really confused, and how you can go online and you're just flooded with content.
Yeah, if you try to Google art, you're curious what you get. Yeah.
You do your best to go to curated sites and find things that you think will be, that will fit your taste. How I did it is I just contacted friends of mine who were in the art world whose taste I respected, and got some
And they said that this painter is really great, and what they were sort of like they whatever pushed you in a certain direction, and then you looked. You said this. And so, what was it about it? It was just the color.
I think I wanted, one thing that I really want to focus on is simplicity in my project. So there was just a simple technique that I could draw from this. But I think in terms, we had talked a little bit about inserting ourselves into these projects and how would we want to live in this house? Are we designing this house for us? What does it mean for today's 20-something to live in a suburb?
Yeah, sure.
But I think in terms of my artist, one thing that I liked was very simply the color palette. I feel like is something that you're seeing researching again back in today's contemporary to my taste on that personal level.
Yeah, I think those things like are interesting, and you should figure out how to engage it. It just seemed like, and I think you brought up, it seemed like, in a lot of cases, it's left. Just to figure out what it is about it, what kind of, if you had to describe how its effects are working in the world, and how you could use it, how it could start to change your, understanding of the architectural object, push you in maybe stranger directions, etc. I would try to do that. I think in general it's really nice. A lot of them are really nice projects. And you could figure out how to push them almost further, a little bit more uncomfortable spaces. Maybe, although I don't know, maybe the whole thing of a one-week charrette and it's sort of set up like this. I don't know. I feel like it's like a game show or something. Whatever it is, it's like it's sort of it's not enough time to really put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. But it's still left. It's sort of left sitting there, and you kind of did an experiment where you squished some pastels around or something, and it's not clear how that affects it. Even like if you were going to just look at how windows are made, or like we're saying how to destroy or disrupt the balloon frame, which I thought was really. I thought the balloon frame as a problem in general is good. It's like a good problem to have to deal with. And in your case, I think they're all something like I could never get to reggae and flamenco. By the way, I was trying to. I was like, look at that interior.
Me too.
Like I want to get there. I think this is like the model is really the best thing for me in your case. Like this, it kind of goes more into like anything like if you were thinking like even like the stair, it would have been the most important. I would imagine in your case, the stair would have been the most exciting, important part of the performance in a way. It could have been that thing that occupies the poche that you were talking about. It could have been the thing that disrupts or produces figures. Like you want the inside to be figural for whatever reason. That could do it. And then I would think there's a whole other aesthetic thing. Instead of like the smooth white stucco plaster surface, like what you're describing, seems to have a total different vitality or whatever you want to call it to it that you could have had more fun with to some degree.
I think, I mean, in this case, I agree. I love the model. It's beautiful. And, you know, the work clearly is all on the interior in terms of the intervention, right? But just the way that you've shown this kind of section, right? Because the garage apartment type is definitely these two separate worlds, right? So the fact that you're, you know, conflating these things together and producing some other space that you would just never, that would not be apparent from the outside, right? So to me, that's why I feel like you sort of held fast to keeping it in that original form. I mean, I love also a little bit, I mean, there's a lot of humor in it too. I mean, the idea of the garage band, like sort of traditional, it was American, you know, and it's like you go in there and you're jamming out, right? Like, you know, even the doors of the garage are this, you know, they're not really, I don't know, what they're like barn doors or something, right? But
yeah,
so
they're weird doors.
There's this whole, which completely doesn't go with what's happening up above at all, you know, so there's some conflict by not.
That green nose is really weird. Like, what is that? That's the hidden space, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea how you get there, but.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Michael's comment too about the stair. I think the stair is kind of funny thing.
But it kind of goes with the door, maybe, I guess. It's sort of like this.
Twin brothers, something. You know, but also even the way that they made the model, I think the idea of baffles, again, just about sound and
yeah, you didn't really do the balloon thing in a way. I mean, it's interesting to do like a gray model in a way. It's a kind of real, and it could be a completely real tectonic system, by the way. There's good architects that have done these plywood houses. So,
there's a kind of thickness to it and acoustical that just goes right along, I think, with your interest in music. So that I really appreciate the project so much for that, this kind of hollowed out space.
I think part of it, when you're doing a project like this scale, there's an opportunity to really just be extreme. You know, it's not like it's not a comprehensive project, although they're incredibly comprehensive. It's not like a comprehensive project. You go crazy. I think like in Anna, in your case, I think the artist and the technique is fantastic. I think you could have just even gone further with it. Like, I don't know why the big windows may seem like kind of like, I would just, it's too much, you know, you could just play with gaps. And what can you do with just these slivers of light and space and just become an expert at like these little cutting slivers instead of defaulting to just erasing a kind of huge surface. I know if you were if it was really like you were living there, of course you would never want to deal with a world of all slivers. You know what I mean? So I can understand that, but as an exercise, you want to really see what you can do with it, how far you can take it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I'm sort of less interested in the facets. What I was really surprised by in your model is when maybe it was just the angle I was sitting at, it looked slightly different, but somehow the way you had turned this, I think it's just more of a black edge, but you somehow revealed this detail that doesn't really show up in the rendering. But to me, that seemed like this moment where you could have this light effect actually start to happen in your project. Something very, very simple. It seems like you were interested somehow in the stair also, because it's rendered differently. I didn't really describe that, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just an idea of representing a more glossy material, like epoxy,
Similar in project, like just go crazier more. I'm like, if you're like, whoever this guy is, this horribly narcissistic show off or whatever, so what? Just like go crazy. Like I would like rotating an interior set of walls 10 to 15 degrees, I mean, I'm surprised how excited you get by it. Like, because, I mean, there's a moment where I would say in the discipline, if you go back 30 years, people would freak out. That's amazing, weird. But for me nowadays, like that's kind of moves. They're just kind of lost on me, honestly. So I would see how far could you destabilize both. The thing that's interesting about the guy to me, from as little as I know from 2 photos and your kind of strange explanation of it, is that he kind of also destabilizes a sort of institutional authority by inserting himself into situations where he doesn't probably belong, and he's not supposed to be doing that. It's like, you know, to see the sign that says, you know, you have to wear shoes when you go into McDonald's, and he'll be like, I'm not wearing shoes, and I'm going to put stuff on my feet and photograph, whatever it is, you know. I have no idea, but he would like push it to a limit of what he thinks that institutions can handle, and see the effects of it, and then place himself at the center of those effects. And you know, like, you could have gone through many things, just like think about like how can you screw with gray even as a color in a weird way, like make gray out of what I don't even know. So, you have to start thinking like this guy.
Well, it's true, but I mean, but his interest is in the walls, right? And I mean, it is, I would say it is radical in that this just would never happen in the garage apartment, as a type, right? Because it was such a, you know, that space, that apartment is just a room, right? And then there's a kind of toilet, and it's like the most minimal, you know, you probably, there's a, you know, I mean, it's not even a galley kitchen, right? It looks, you know, it's worse than a New York City apartment almost, right? As a kind of place to live. So the fact that you would then produce kind of, actually make an interior and interior, and that you're rotating it, that it somehow also, I think part of what you were talking about maybe was that it also how it hits the exterior wall and does something. It's not quite clear, but that would have some sort of registration for you.
I mean, I think
makes sense here.
I mean, they're all, that's why I'm saying take all the stuff that you saw, you know, whatever. But like for me, when I look at the section perspective, the most interesting parts are the images. I mean, like if you took out all your collage, the people and the images, I think it wouldn't even be. So I think it's something to think about. Is, you know, maybe we have to start to think about the role of images on architecture or something spatially, or something like this. I have no idea. You know, you could be pushing something like this, or you know, how does the selfie affect architecture? So I'm sure there's something there.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think it's interesting, just going back to the pure type. I mean, I guess in a way, just to sort of look at that, it's almost a square plan, garage apartment, right? Yeah. So that then you're, in a way, I mean, I can't tell even, I don't think it's clear what the geometry is even that you're sort of inserting. It's very random. I think that's also part of the sort of struggle with it. But you know, again, this idea of it's almost like nesting, creating another interior. And the fact is you're proposing a way to live with more than one person. And yet your drawings are all about an individual. So I think that there's some sort of contradictory thing going on that in your project that's not clear to me, but has potential. And that you could really think about the way in which the garage apartment could become this thing where it is about multiple 20-year-olds living and sharing, and you know, or how many people could you actually pack in that. So just as a kind of pragmatic, but to produce them in that way, then you produce what your artist is doing. Right? Then all of a sudden you have multiple people living in this very small space that, you know, do you have a roommate who is actually doing those things, you know, and annoying you and whatever, but like, I think you're, you know, by the nature of inserting this other form in your project, you know, whether it rotates or it's even rectilinear and parallel, I think that's, for me, it's less about what the thing does as opposed to you're actually putting something else inside a form that was typically it's interesting.
I told him to do wallpaper.
To do wallpaper?
I can imagine that this guy would make a wallpaper of himself, you know, from all his drawings.
did that, it would be kind of amazing. Yeah, all of a sudden you would, I don't know what you would do. You know, you can start to have, you go quick, you can start to have windows in the shape of his head or something. You know what I mean? Like when he looks out into the world, he wants to see it through his own shape of his own head. I have no idea. That would be kind of horribly pitched maybe, but like you could. I mean, you would just play around with it. Go as far as you can. The last one, the first one. I mean, I think it's. I love this beaded. Where's this artist? Yeah.
Oh, she's from Michigan. She lives in Arizona. She's from Ojibwe.
And what when you see it, when you're looking at it, and you said it's steeped in tradition, but also contemporary in a way.
Yeah, like.
What's the contemporary part, and what's the traditional part?
The contemporary is just like with that piece. It's a piece that you wear across your shoulder. It's really just not in the traditional way of native regalia.
Yeah. And the traditional part is what? Just the technique of making it.
Yeah, that's just like a stitching of the.
I would just think about how you deal with that in architecture, and it will just take a kind of more. I mean, for me, when I'm looking, I'll tell you like the biggest like no-no is your stair. In my mind, it's just like that space under the stair. It's like kind of classic no-no in my mind. It's just sort of a 5-foot inaccessible space. But regardless, you know, how do you think about the effects, whatever it is? You know, of course, there's a totally different model in architecture. It's a different kind of material relationship. It's not managed by one person with small pieces of material over time, different labor process, etc. But how would you really rethink it in architecture? And I think you were starting to get onto something with your screens, but you just didn't. You know, you need to do more of it almost. I mean, it's just hard to read.
I think for me, the most beautiful part is this moment in your project here. That's what you did in detail. Yeah, that's the detail. Yeah. Sometimes it's nicer in the drawing. It's a drawing, but to begin to think about. Anyway, but by extension, I think the way you're working at the ground just is very simple column grid, right? I mean, there is a kind of system, this kind of layering of system and kind of armature that you're working with. And I think you could just be more attuned to what's happening in terms of the ground and your relationship to the ground and the roof, right? Those two things to me are where your project really lies. And then you have this system of grids that enclose you. And it's very straightforward. And I think you could just, I agree with Michael, I don't think you need the kind of stairs and that other sort of space that's happening, although I think scale-wise.
I don't mind if you could use it differently.
Yeah, you just should represent what happens in there instead of an empty space. But it's interesting that you've actually rotated your roof to the street compared to the way, you know, so again, there's a moment of sort of invention that you're just not sort of readily accepting the type as it exists. But then what does that do for you? What do you get? I mean, I think you have this overlap and then a kind of shade. There's all sort of issues around light that I think you could further explore in your drawings.
I think the model, for me, the balloon frame model is the best. Is your best thing, honestly, too. I mean, it doesn't have any though. Has none of the qualities of the beaded. I'm not sure what it is that when you were just saying going like this thing is, but it has none of those qualities in a way. I mean, but it seems like it seems really well done. And it seems to have more. It seems to have more going on than the section perspective. That's a lot. I mean, part of it is because the section perspective, you lose both the material problem, let's say, of structure somehow, because the way you pocheted all in blue, and you also lose the kind of material quality almost because it's all rendered in white or something. So, and in the wood model, you kind of get this kind of amazing filigree, this sort of complexity just from simple wood.
to tell that they started with the framing model.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the renderings became the panic of the last few days, but.
That's good.
Yeah, they spent a lot of time on the framing, I think, because you learned a lot from it. How many of you was this the first time you've done a framing model?
That's great. This thing is amazing, the color.
Yeah.
I keep thinking it's got electric light or something. Yeah.
Why the color, Jared?
Just because it's kind of this object within the system, so it stands out.
That's interesting. I mean, I think I was very interested in the way you described the artist and working through this kind of sort of highly finished images and models, right? We're so used to, without question, and then this kind of other worldliness quality almost. Because certainly the orange is pretty striking in the Manila, right? Although, I mean, when you're there and you're walking around and you see the bungalows that are actually rented out to other arts groups, I mean, they're pretty vibrant in the way that they've sort of taken over the interiors. But I think it's interesting also to think about issues of environment. And one of my favorite spaces is the interior of the mill, where Piano has the garden space, right? Which is definitely kind of a reflection back to their house. Johnson's, that's an important space. To have some sort of vitality at the heart of the house is pretty great. So I feel like in several of these you can see that is where that's manifesting itself.
Yeah, I think it's really well done. I mean, it seems like, I think your project seems like, I mean, I feel like it exists.
Should we take a few minutes and break, and then we'll flip and do the next 6? Yeah? All right, let's take 5 minutes.
As Jasmine just said, I'm Andrew. So the two things that I extracted from our research of the neighborhood that I thought were really interesting things. Number one, the issue of the transient apartment dweller and the kind of institutionalized or more institutionalized neighborhood of the mill. I think there's a certain anxiety about who is actually coming into the neighborhood and what impact they'll have on the area. And then secondly, about kind of the issue of the roof geometry. Obviously, the bungalow having this gabled or hip roof condition, it's something that needs to have an attitude. So I definitely explored that in my process this past week. Then if we get to the artist that I was inspired by, about 3 weeks ago, I came across something online about a video game that was actually taken down from an online store. Somebody made a copyright claim about their content being used. And it actually happened to be this drawing right here. Carlos Ramirez was an art student at a community college in Oakland, California. And in 2008, he decided to upload this image to DeviantArt. It's actually a really horrible sketch of a character that he was making for a comic book that went terribly wrong. But for some reason, he decided to upload it, and people immediately kind of gravitated towards this image and distributed it, and it became highly ubiquitous. So I'm less interested in whether or not this is art, but the fact that the website and the framework of the website and the internet actually gave the individual and the collective a huge agency over creating meaning. And so I wanted to see then how the garage apartment could be used as a framework for the individual to very deliberately create an identity for themselves in the neighborhood. So the largest move at the scale of the garage apartment happens on that lower floor, where this actually becomes completely transparent from front to back where the garage is. So I shift the car to the back of the plan and then create these layers of unprogrammed space, the carport, which is enclosed, and then an exterior stair that leads up to the living space. The living space itself, in contrast to this very open public lower floor, becomes much more it becomes much more articulated in relation to human habitation. So you can see how I start to articulate the wall surfaces and to create thickness to define areas such as the bathroom, the shower, the bedroom, and the kitchen, which is more open with a picture window looking out to the backyard of suburbia. And then finally, at the top where this roof is, that is shaped in a way to accommodate this kind of precarious perch, where you're all of a sudden editing out the surrounding area and you're just allowed to kind of focus on the sky. And then the central core is actually this bookcase that also transforms into storage for some of the other areas that you can climb up to reach that part on the top. Tectonically then, start to articulate the outside in a way that that lower space seems to kind of slip up into this thin, planar metal facade system with continuous seams to help that reading of this folded, lightweight, almost protective kind of barrier. And then, and as I said before, you can kind of see how those spaces get carved. And I strategically use transparency and translucency to create a kind of mystique about the identity of the person who's living there. So ultimately then, if you were to take this house and populate a neighborhood with them, you can imagine that the whole lower floor of the neighborhood, you kind of wander around and you start to experience a gallery of spaces that are really about the individual creating the gallery.
Thanks, Andrew. You?
So one of the things that I was really interested in was pure genericness of the garage apartment type, and more specifically the genericness of its program. And so in looking through different artists, and I did sort of wander the internet at first looking for things, and I wasn't coming up with anything that really inspired me for this. And then I thought back to our original conversation when you visited on Thursday of the past week, and when you ran into those super sacks that are in my studio, and just how you reacted to them with, you said, I love this, it's so dumb. We got an extra one for you. There are these, there's these 3 foot by 3 foot by 4 foot sacks that carry powdered lactose and say lactose with huge letters on them. They're awesome. Anyway, pretty much what you said about that is what inspired me choosing this artist. And when you said, I love this is so dumb, it made me think of what I love that's dumb. And as we were just saying earlier, people love Riff Raff because he's dumb. He's sort of this train wreck that everyone loves to watch. He's a personality and a rapper, but what I focused more on was not his music, but the fact that he's a personality, and people with these really extreme personalities are usually pretty transient in nature, and at least for their fame, and that spoke really well to the transient nature of someone living in an apartment garage. So with him and his persona being completely over-designed, but also under-designed in some way, as he's just using different pop culture and hip-hop references and tattooing them onto his body with his MTV Red Rap tattoo, BET, World Star Hip Hop, NBA, just random things tattooed onto his body that inspired me to look at what is traditionally over and under-designed within the garage apartment type and completely invert that. So what is one of the last things that's thought about in this type is the bathroom. So that's the first thing I started with, taking the
It was your fireplace, right?
Yeah. It's this like, well, it was originally a fireplace, but got brought down. So taking the traditional form of garage apartment type and really celebrating the think tank, which is the toilet. And I gave it lights on the, light well on the top and also on the bottom when it has a glass floor. So frosted glass, of course. Yeah. Or not. But then these circulation throughout the home is coming up through the stair and circling around and winding around the house and elevating each program until you finally get to the plinth, which is this bathroom. And then another element of the home of this type that is really sort of tacked on is the stair to get up there. It's normally an exterior stair. So I wanted to play with what's interior and exterior and move it to the center of the building and make it this grand space that lets light into the rest of the house. And sort of just rethinks tacking something onto the side of the building. And then also rethinking the garage, which is one of the other really dumb portions of this type. That is just a CMU block system with some siding on the side and then there's a house above. So I decided to completely dissolve it and let the vanilla lawn sort of fade into it, and then as they aggregate together with a series of homes, then it becomes this space where someone can come down the stairs which are facing the street. As in, here I am. This is me.
Stairs aren't in there.
It's not in this.
They weave between the legs. Or
yes, you're looking at this.
Detail.
So you got that. Yeah.
So yeah, as someone comes down through the system, they're coming in this field of stills that are open to this house. And then another design system in this visually is the facade system. So I decided to pass it and make it sort of dance like this tattoo on the side of the building, referring to his skin and tattoos that still have some semblance of recognition with the neighborhood, as they would be painted gray to fit the middle of the neighborhood, and then but also have the horizontal lines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin?
Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to look at in the research was the bungalow type. Because in Houston, as the main type, specifically in the Mill neighborhood, there's not very many garage types. So I wanted to see what was important in that type that could be applied to this. And so there's a quote from Gustav Stickley that was, a house should be in harmony with nature, have an open floor plan, built-in furniture, and abundant natural light. That's all the common features of a bungalow type house. And so those were some of the things that I wanted to exaggerate and exemplify in this garage type apartment, or garage apartment type. So Houston is also considered a climate for a generic city, which should be inclined for a tropical area. It's a subtropical climate, which means there's a lot of opportunity for plantings and vegetation. And so a generic city, when you think of that, is usually the built environment. And so what if you think about the generic landscape or the generic exterior? So with those ideas, I started to look at an artist. Her name is Amy Shackleton. And here's an example of her work where she's considered a gravity artist, where she uses daubs of paint on the canvas and then tilts it along the wall and lets gravity take the paint drop and create the painting itself. So her work turns into these urban landscapes where there's sort of a blur between the forest and the natural environment versus the constructed and manufactured environment. So what I wanted to take out of that was, again, about the bungalow type where they have a very dominant front porch. And I wanted to invert that, make the porch this interior element that radiates out from the center of the building. So the overall form of the building is very generic. It's the volume of a garage apartment type. But then there's a few features that are sort of blended together to make it read slightly different. So there'd be this exterior stair, which from the front in profile would read as a regular gable roof, but then it's actually this carve out of the building, which leads to that sort of porch formation and to this, these light wells that wrap through the building. And then these light wells and exterior spaces also separate the program. So you have the main living space right here, the service bar, and then the bedrooms and a loft area, which can serve as either a single tenant or else extra guests can occupy the upper space. And the garage itself, although the garage apartment type usually takes up the first floor entirely, What I wanted to do was I wanted to carve out a little corner of this building, also carve out the landscape where the cars would park, so that there's that blur between the void space of the constructed and the void space of the innate would be combined together. And then this one slot here, this third of the building would be for the car, where the other 2/3 is for an art gallery or a workshop, or even a secondary house. It would be sublet to others. It's big enough in that sense where it could be even like how garage apartments were originally thought out, where they would be in the back of the house. Now there's another house and then the back of the house.
Auxiliary inside of the auxiliary.
Yeah. So, detail-wise, that's this one right there. I wanted to carve through or cut through this open space of the building. So you see this light wall that travels through. And I was using basic windows, modular windows, which from the exterior, you get the impression that it's fairly regular, like a normal house. But then, because they're this radiated, they're attached to the light walls in the middle, they feel larger, and you can see through the entire building. And this would be the roof garden right here, which is similar to the other two conditions. And you have these three highlighted spaces, which would be the entrance stair parting through, the garage parting through, and then the roof garden at the end. And then finally, there's sort of the pinnacle of the space, which is this little resting area. That's also shown up here, where you're completely surrounded by the exterior, have a view of the sky, and it's at the top of the loft, and then even another level higher from that, where you step over the exterior to get into that space.
Thank you, Jessica. Sarah?
I was really kind of put off by the stair, how it's just slapped on the side of the building. It's the main connection between the garage and the apartment, and it almost seems forgotten. And when looking into artists, I came across Britta Boatman, who creates these pieces of jewelry from end cuts of wood and colored resin. And the thing that really interested me about her work was this moment of connection. That's what I find most intriguing. So to redesign the garage apartment, I decided to focus on the connection between the garage and the apartment. So instead of splitting the building horizontally, I split it vertically, creating the garage in the front and the apartment in the back. And by sliding the stair in between, I created a studio above the garage, and the apartment is split into living and kitchen on the first floor and bedroom bath on the second. The building is clad from the street. It looks typical of the Mill neighborhood, the gray siding and the stereotypical white double-hung windows. But the interior facades that face each other are glass, and they open up to this core in the center. And finally, I imagined if there were a multitude of these buildings strung along each other, that they would create this pedestrian pathway in the middle that would lead to the Mill institutions.
You want to tell me about your teacher?
Oh, yeah.
And finally again.
Finally again. So this detail, I was just trying to show the way that I would treat the facade, the glass facade, and then this would be the gray siding. And this is just in this corner here. It's right here.
Thank you, Sarah. Hilary?
Hi, guys. From my research, I wanted to focus this design of this project on the original historic framework of, the American house, especially the lawn being the kind of farmable area land, and the living space being the farmstead.
Speak up.
Oh, the farmstead. And I guess in contemporary culture, so I was wondering about the status of the two programs, how they're both very different, obviously, but at the same time they're one and the same. And the lawn being a public space, but at the same time it is also a private space. That's how it's perceived. The living room being a place that is obviously private, but at the same time it is also perceived as a public space to engage guests. So at the end of the day, they've both become a commodity for the American household as a place to showcase without actually being dwelled. So I guess the design of this project is primarily focused on collapsing the two programs, the lawn and the living room, into one singular interstitial space that is basically in section a linear interface with the street front, almost taking this the idea of this, I guess, living room lawn as a stage. Oh yeah, my artist is Oprah Elias, and he's an atmospheric artist. He uses environmental qualities such as texture, light, material to really have the audience be their own judge of what is reality and what is artificiality. And when those two actually become one, I guess that's something to decide. So having that gradient of space is what I kind of like to explore. Like you being the spectator at the same time, like the street friends also people outside to actually become like the spectator in. And tectonically, like framing the model in such a way that as you push further in, the structure that dissolves goes from nothing to a very light frame to a very open frame, and then over the structure tectonic until you reach the almost private. I guess it touches on domesticity the most because it becomes the restaurant, just the court, a stair shaft. And also to elevate the idea of artificiality, I want to heighten the sense that I guess the vernacular lighting quality is all around Houston by understanding the dapple lighting effect as a facade system and project a dapple effect which is entirely artificial. So it's purposes that can it's almost like a blank space without trees, but still contain that experience. So in the section model, I kind of want to stress on thinness of material and push further in gradual gradation and that's here.
Thanks, Phil. Last but not least, Nick.
Typical shape to it, there's the garage below and the apartment above. It's very small dwelling type. And so kind of wanting to stick within that kind of, I guess, stereotypical frame. I looked at also the idea of visibility from permeability. So there's a quote here by Benyamin when talking about the original American Piano Museum. Works would appear, disappear, and reappear like actors on a stage due to the fact that they have an overwhelming collection of art, so they're constantly curating it through the gallery. And then also the idea of the duck versus decorated shed. How those are separated from each other, but how those can be kind of blended together to kind of create an ambiguity. So my house system here is a CLT kind of vertical system with a kind of a floating facade up front, which kind of, I would say, mimics the idea of the decorated shed that's projecting out this kind of typical garage apartment. But also it is a garage apartment behind it, so it's also the duck, I would say. And so then that idea of the kind of actors on stage, that visibility becomes apparent within the structure. So you're constantly seeing this kind of gradated view of the inside of the apartment. Looked at an artist by the name of Brian Murr. He deals he's a sculpture artist that deals with laminated plywood as his medium. And so he kind of creates these new combinations of familiar forms. So, duck here.
Are they
with the claymore behind it.
What? How big are they, by the way?
This is it's like this big. This is huge. This is like this is probably 5.5 feet tall. This is like a big, giant human scale piece. If it was like a piece. And so I guess that idea of lamination also can kind of become, I guess, just kind of the generator of the structural system itself. So you can see here the diagram. Started off with a kind of typical frame here, extruded it out, but then took out that void. It's also kind of created dialogue between the exterior and the interior. And so again, the courtyard being an important kind of aspect of the mill, I kind of get this forecourt. We also kind of get a reading of the thinness and kind of falseness of this front facade with having kind of vegetation coming through behind it. And then, so it still has the kind of typical layout. There's a small apartment above with a couple skylights in areas that would be, so when there's above the bed, you'd be able to kind of look out, kind of cut out the city itself and just see the sky. And then this lower level can either be a garage or a workshop for an artist and an artisan, but it does kind of have that ambiguity that comes into play. And then the doors could then open up to the street, kind of creating a dialogue or gallery space with the neighborhood.
Can you talk about your detail?
Yeah. So the detail, again, you can kind of see the CLT construction. In order to kind of insulate the building, there's like a curtain wall in here that would become invisible, kind of this exterior thinness of the curtain or the CLT. And then the exterior is kind of clad in this wash of siding. So from the side of the house, you have this unbroken wall of kind of domesticity and the house, the area.
Okay,